Snow was slowly erasing the streets of Briar Glen when retired Navy SEAL Wade Callahan heard a weak cry behind a closed flower shop. Beneath the awning, an 8-week-old German shepherd puppy lay curled against a winter wreath, one tiny paw pressed over its cream ribbon. Wade searched the surrounding blocks, questioned nearby shopkeepers, and waited nearly 2 hours. But no one came looking for her. What troubled him most was not the abandoned puppy, but the empty parking space where florist Loretta Vale's delivery van should have been. At his cabin, the puppy refused to leave the wreath and accidentally turned it over, revealing a root slip hidden on the back. Loretta had left hours earlier for a riverside road, and now her phone was silent as the storm swallowed the last lights of town. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories like this. By late afternoon, Briar Glen had begun to disappear by degrees. The mountains were gone first, swallowed behind a pale wall of snow. Then the roofs across Main Street softened at the edges, their chimneys and gutters fading into the white. Before long, even the far end of the block seemed less like a place than a memory of one. Still, the town had not gone dark. Warm light spilled from the pharmacy windows. A neon coffee cup glowed above the diner, flickering each time the wind shook the sign. Shopkeepers moved quickly behind glass, turning locks, lowering blinds, carrying the last boxes inside before the storm hardened around them. Wade Callahan walked through it all at a pace slower than he preferred. At 51, he still had the broad shoulders and compact strength of a man who had spent most of his adult life training his body not to fail him. But the left knee had its own opinion about winter. Every 4th or 5th step sent a dull ache up the side of his leg. He ignored it until ignoring it required effort. His truck was at Mercer Auto with a failing alternator. The mechanic had promised it back by morning, weather permitting, which in Montana was a polite way of saying no promise had been made at all. Wade carried a paper sack of groceries beneath one arm. His dark green parka was zipped to the throat, and beneath it the olive body of an old combat shirt showed at the collar. The camouflage sleeves had faded from years of washing, though the dark horizontal bands around the upper arms remained visible. He no longer wore the shirt because of what it represented. He wore it because it fit, because it lasted, and because replacing a useful thing before it failed felt wasteful. The wind drove loose snow across the sidewalk in low ribbons. Wade lowered his head and passed the darkened windows of Winter Vale Floral. He had gone 3 steps beyond the rear awning when he heard something, a faint metallic tap. He stopped. The sound came again, too soft to identify. It might have been a hanging hook striking the window frame, or a loose sign turning in the wind. Wade waited. The town moved around him in muffled pieces, a car door slamming, tires grinding through fresh snow, the low groan of the plow several blocks away. Then came a sound that did not belong to wood or metal, a thin, uneven whine. Wade turned back. The flower shop had already closed. The front display was dark except for a string of small white lights wrapped around a bare branch. Through the glass he could make out buckets, ribbons, and the shadowed shapes of potted plants. He followed the sound toward the delivery entrance. Beneath the narrow awning, partly hidden behind a wooden stand, a German shepherd puppy lay curled beside a winter wreath. For a second, Wade did not move. The puppy was small enough to fit across both of his forearms. Snow clung to its black and gold coat, especially along the back and between the ears. One ear stood upright, the other folded near the tip. Its muzzle was dark, and a pale drop-shaped patch showed faintly beneath the chin where the front legs pressed together. The wreath was modest, made from pine, white flowers, and a cream ribbon darkened by melted snow. The puppy had one paw resting on that ribbon. Wade set the grocery sack beneath the awning. He did not reach forward. Instead, he lowered himself slowly, favoring the left knee, and sat back on one heel several feet away. He removed his gloves and placed both hands on his thighs, where the puppy could see them. The animal watched him without lifting its head. Its eyes were a warm amber brown, too alert for exhaustion, and too uncertain for trust. "No one's asking you to decide yet," Wade said. His voice came out lower than usual. Not gentle in any performative way, merely steady. The puppy's nose moved. It did not retreat, but the paw tightened over the ribbon. Wade looked around the delivery area. There was no food bowl, blanket, or open carrier. No fresh human footprints except his own. Snow had already begun filling the shallow marks around the awning. He waited another minute, then shifted backward rather than closer. The puppy blinked. That small response felt less like progress than permission not to make things worse. Wade stood and began searching the area. He checked the narrow parking lot behind the shop, the gap between the flower store and the pharmacy, and the covered loading space where delivery boxes were stacked against the wall. He walked along the alley, calling softly and pausing after each call. Nothing answered. At the edge of the lot stood an old green delivery van, usually driven by Loretta Vale, but its parking space was empty. That bothered him more than the puppy. Loretta was 72, sharp-tongued, silver-haired, and nearly impossible to hurry. She owned Winter Vale Floral and lived in the apartment above it. Wade had repaired the back steps for her the previous spring. She had argued over the invoice for 15 minutes, and then added $20 because, in her words, a man who measures twice deserves to eat lunch. On storm days, Loretta closed early. She also never left delivery wreaths beneath the rear awning unless she planned to return within minutes. Wade went around to the front of the building and looked up at the apartment windows. No lights. At the pharmacy, a young clerk was pulling a metal security gate across the entrance. Wade showed him a quick photograph of the puppy. The clerk shook his head. "Haven't seen it. Loretta left a while ago, though." "What time?" "Maybe 2, little after." "Was she alone?" "I think so." The answer stayed with Wade. At the diner, the owner had not seen the dog. A cashier at the gas station said no one had asked about a missing puppy. 2 employees closing the hardware store walked with Wade behind their building and checked beneath the storage overhang. No mother dog appeared. No one called from the snow. By the time Wade returned to the flower shop, nearly 40 minutes had passed. The puppy had not moved far. It had shifted its body so the wreath blocked part of the wind, but its paw still rested over the ribbon. Wade crouched again. This time the puppy raised its head. The movement revealed the small cream mark on its chest, shaped almost like a falling drop. "You've got poor taste in shelter," Wade said, "but decent instincts about staying out of the wind." The puppy stared at him. Then, very carefully, it placed its left paw on the toe of his boot. The contact lasted less than a second. The paw withdrew at once. But something inside Wade shifted with it. Not sentiment. Not yet. Recognition, perhaps. He knew what it meant to touch safety before trusting it. Wade called the veterinary clinic first. The receptionist took the description and checked their list of missing animals. Nothing matched. Animal control had received no report. At the sheriff's office, a dispatcher logged the location and told him no one had reported a lost puppy in town or the surrounding county. The veterinarian on call asked Wade to check the puppy's gums, eyes, and balance. He moved slowly, allowing the animal to smell his fingers before touching the muzzle. The puppy flinched once but did not snap. Its gums were pink, its eyes tracked movement. When Wade encouraged it to stand, it managed several unsteady steps before sitting again. The veterinarian said the puppy was cold and tired, but did not sound critically ill. It needed warmth, water, and food suitable for its age. Wade looked toward the empty parking space again. "What about the shop owner?" he asked the dispatcher when he called the sheriff's office a second time. "No missing person report. Her van's gone. Apartment is dark. She may be making deliveries." "In this weather?" A pause. "We'll note it." Wade knew the answer was reasonable. Adults left home without reporting their plans. Vehicles were not required to remain where neighbors expected them. A dark apartment did not prove danger. Still, reason did not settle the unease. The snow had thickened while he searched. It gathered along the awning and softened the corners of the delivery entrance. The temperature was dropping quickly enough that Wade could feel it through the knees of his trousers. He waited another hour. He stood beneath the awning, then walked the block again. He checked behind the pharmacy, crossed to the service lane, and returned. Each time, the puppy watched him leave. Each time, it remained on the wreath. When he came back the final time, the animal was trembling hard enough that its shoulders shook. Wade stopped pretending the decision still belonged to him. He removed his parka, wrapped the puppy inside it, and lifted with one hand beneath the chest and the other supporting the hind legs. The small body stiffened. Then the puppy pressed its nose against the faded camouflage sleeve beneath Wade's coat. Wade picked up the wreath with his free hand. "I'm taking this too," he said, "in case it knows more than either of us." The cabin sat less than a mile beyond town, tucked among lodgepole pine and open pasture. By the time Wade reached it, snow covered his shoulders, and the grocery sack had softened from dampness. Inside, he lit the wood stove and placed the puppy on a folded blanket near the hearth. The animal remained still at first, watching the room. Wade set out water in a shallow bowl. He drove no farther than the gas station store, where he bought canned puppy food and a small packet of soft treats under the uncertain guidance of a cashier who owned 2 cats and therefore considered herself not entirely useless. Back at the cabin, the puppy ate slowly. It drank. Then it began to explore. Its first journey took it around the edge of the rug, beneath the kitchen chair, and directly into the side of a basket. It backed away, looked offended, and tried again from another angle. Wade watched from the counter. The cabin had been arranged for one person over many quiet years. One mug near the sink, one coat on the wall, boots aligned beneath the bench, firewood stacked by size. The puppy disrupted none of it dramatically. It simply made every object look as though it might belong to a different life. Wade hung the wet parka near the stove and placed the wreath by the door to dry. The puppy noticed at once. It left the blanket, crossed the floor on uncertain legs, and lowered itself against the pine branches. Wade moved the wreath closer to the hearth. The puppy followed. It seized the cream ribbon between its teeth and pulled. "Leave it." The puppy pulled again. The wreath flipped onto its back. A clear plastic sleeve had been secured to the wire frame. Inside was a root slip, damp at the edges but readable. Wade knelt and drew it free. Pine Lantern Residence. Driver, Loretta Vale. Departure time, 2:10 p.m. Alternate route, River Road. North Bridge under repair. He checked his watch. 5:54. The wood stove clicked softly behind him. The puppy pressed its nose to the wreath and settled against it, as though it had reached the only place it knew. Wade called the sheriff's office again. This time the dispatcher did not sound patient. A neighbor had just reported that Loretta had not returned to her apartment. Her phone went directly to voicemail. Her van had not been seen since early afternoon. Wade turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the last lights of Briar Glen blurred and vanished behind the snow. The puppy lifted its head. And for the first time that evening, Wade understood that finding it might not have been the beginning of a rescue. It might have been the evidence that someone else still needed one. Sheriff Naomi Voss called back 9 minutes after Wade's third conversation with dispatch. He knew because he had checked his watch twice. The puppy lay near the stove, wrapped in a gray wool blanket with only its head exposed. The wreath rested upside down on the table, its damp pine needles leaving dark marks on the wood. Beside it, the root slip sat beneath the weight of Wade's carpenter's pencil. "Callahan," he answered. "This is the Sheriff Voss." Her voice was calm, without being soft. Wade had heard that kind of voice before. People who saved their urgency for decisions, instead of letting it leak into every sentence. "We've confirmed Loretta Vale hasn't returned home," Naomi said. "A neighbor checked the apartment above the shop. No answer. Her phone is going straight to voicemail." Wade looked toward the puppy. It had lifted its head at Loretta's name. "The route slip says River Road," he said. "I know what it says. There's an old wooden bridge 3 miles south of the mill turnoff. I know that too." The answer carried no irritation, only a boundary. Naomi Voss had served as sheriff of Granite County for nearly 8 years. Wade had seen her around town in a tan uniform and dark brown winter coat, black hair tied low at the back of her neck. She was not tall, but she had the stillness of someone who never needed to prove that a room belonged to her once she entered it. Wade had repaired a broken porch rail at the sheriff's office the previous summer. Naomi had watched him measure the same board twice and said, "Good. I don't trust people who are proud of guessing." Now she asked him to repeat everything from the beginning. Wade gave her the time on the route slip, the address, the note about the bridge, and the empty parking space behind Wintervale Floral. He described the puppy, the wreath, and the fact that the animal seemed attached to the shop's scent. "You believe Loretta had the dog with her?" "I believe it's possible." "That isn't the same thing." "No. What makes it possible?" "The puppy smelled like cut pine and floral preservative. Same as the wreath. There was no sign it had been outside long enough to collect that smell on its own." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Fair." Wade heard paper moving on her end. "There's a 5-car collision on Highway 12, she said. 2 ambulances and most of the volunteer fire crew are tied up there. River Road hasn't been plowed since this morning. Visibility is worsening, and the bridge approach freezes early. I can take my truck when it's... No. My neighbor has... No, Wade." The use of his first name stopped him more effectively than the word itself. Naomi continued. "You are not driving an unplowed county road in a borrowed vehicle during a closure. If Loretta's in that van, then I need to reach her without creating a second person who needs to be reached." Wade looked at the dark window above the sink. Snow pressed against the glass in soft bursts, then vanished into the night. He knew she was right. That did not make standing still easier. "What can I do?" he asked. "Tell me your relevant experience, not your resume, the part that matters tonight." Wade almost smiled. "Cold weather movement, basic trauma care, rope systems, low visibility navigation. Vehicle recovery? No. Hydraulic winches? No. Structural assessment of an old bridge? No." Naomi's response came without hesitation. "Then you'll do what you know. You won't do what you don't." The sentence settled in the room. Wade had spent years believing usefulness meant expanding until no task remained outside his reach. It had been rewarded once. Later, it had become habit. Even now, retired and living alone in a cabin where no one asked anything of him, his first instinct was still to become the entire answer. Naomi refused to let him. "I'm calling Amos Bell," she said. "He's clearing the county equipment yard. His plow has a hydraulic winch, and he's handled vehicle recovery with the volunteer fire department. Deputy Ortiz is coming from the south access." "How long?" "Amos is 12 minutes from you. Lena may need 25, depending on the drifts." Wade checked the puppy again. "What about the dog?" "That's your decision. But make it like an adult." Naomi ended the call before he could answer. Wade stood in the quiet cabin with the phone still in his hand. The puppy blinked at him. "Apparently we're both under supervision," he said. He moved quickly without rushing. A thermal blanket went into a canvas pack, followed by a compact first aid kit, 2 flashlights, spare batteries, hand warmers, bottled water, and a stainless steel flask filled with warm, not hot, water. He changed into waterproof trousers, tightened the brace beneath his left knee, and pulled his forest green parka over the olive combat shirt. The puppy watched every movement. Wade found a plastic pet carrier in the shed, left behind by the cabin's previous owner. He lined it with towels and placed it near the stove. The puppy sniffed the open door. Wade set a small bowl of water inside. It backed away. "Safer here," he said. The puppy looked at the carrier, then at Wade's coat. When he lifted the parka from the chair, it began to whine. Not loudly, not dramatically. It moved to the wreath, caught the loose cream ribbon in its teeth, and pulled. Then it crossed toward the door, changed direction, and returned to the wreath again. Wade stopped fastening his gloves. The puppy was not trying to lead him anywhere. It had no understanding of roads, missing people, or rescue plans. It simply could not decide which source of safety it was about to lose. Wade crouched and picked up the ribbon. Even damp, it carried the sharp scent of pine and something faintly sweet beneath it. Flowers, soap, perhaps the residue of Loretta's hands. The same scent clung to the puppy's neck. "You remember her," Wade said. The puppy pressed its left paw onto his boot. For a moment, Wade considered leaving it. That would be the safest choice in the simplest sense. The cabin was warm. The crate was secure. He might be gone only a few hours. But an 8-week-old puppy left alone in an unfamiliar room during a storm could panic, injure itself, or become chilled if the fire weakened. Bringing it onto an active rescue site was equally irresponsible. The compromise arrived with the sound of a diesel engine outside. Amos Bell's snowplow rolled into the drive behind a wall of amber light. The machine was broad and scarred from years of winter work. Its plow blade wore a rim of frozen gray snow. A yellow beacon turned slowly above the cab, painting the pines in circles. Amos climbed down wearing insulated brown overalls beneath a bright orange work coat with reflective strips. He was shorter than Wade, thick through the chest and middle, with a reddish-brown mustache now turning silver at the edges. His knit cap was mustard yellow, and 3 different thermoses hung from a canvas carrier in one hand. He looked at Wade's pack. "You bring enough supplies to invade Canada?" "Only if they have better roads." "That's the spirit." Amos held up the thermoses. "Coffee, hot water, and something my former wife described as a cinnamon-based error." "Which one is coffee?" Amos stared at the containers. "That information may have been lost." The puppy appeared behind Wade's leg. Amos's expression changed at once. "Well," he said more quietly, "there's our witness." "Not a witness." "No? Just a puppy?" Amos nodded as though the distinction mattered. Together they secured the pet carrier inside the plow cab behind the passenger seat. Wade placed the puppy inside with a warm towel, but it began pawing urgently at the door. Amos opened a storage compartment and produced a soft-sided insulated equipment bag used for keeping batteries from freezing. It had ventilation panels, a rigid base, and interior straps. "Clean," he said. "Never held anything worse than a radio and 1 ham sandwich." Wade lined it with the blanket and fastened the puppy inside, leaving the upper mesh open for air. He attached the bag to a floor anchor behind the seats, away from the doors and equipment controls. The puppy settled only after Wade placed the cream ribbon inside. "Pup stays in the cab," Amos said. "No exceptions." And neither of us becomes creative without telling Naomi. Wade gave him a look. Amos raised both hands. I was instructed to say that exactly. They pulled out of the drive at 6:21. Briar Glen vanished behind them within minutes. The snowplow moved slowly, blade angled to push the deepest accumulation away from the narrow road. The engine vibrated through the floor. Wind struck the windshield in bursts, leaving white streaks faster than the wipers could clear them. Wade sat forward, scanning beyond the reach of the headlights. Amos worked with patient precision. He did not fight the road. He listened to the engine, felt the resistance through the steering wheel, and adjusted before the drifts could turn the machine. This was his terrain. For once, Wade occupied the seat beside the expertise instead of becoming it. The radio crackled. Belle Callahan, this is Voss. Amos lifted the handset. Go ahead. Deputy Ortiz is approaching from the south maintenance track. She'll stop at the service junction and continue on foot if the road closes. Copy. No one crosses the bridge until she evaluates the near structure. Amos glanced at Wade. Copy that very specific instruction. Naomi ignored the emphasis. Report anything you find. Do not assume debris means the vehicle continued in the same direction. The radio went silent. For the first mile, there was nothing but snow. Then Wade saw a pale shape near the ditch. Stop! Amos braked gradually. Wade stepped down while remaining attached to a short safety line clipped inside the cab. Half buried beside the road was a strip of white floral wrapping paper. No writing. No blood. No indication of when it had fallen. He held it beneath the flashlight. The edge was printed with the small green crest of Winter Vale Floral. Back inside, he placed it in a clear bag. 200 yards farther, they found several white petals pressed into the snow. Beyond that lay a broken pine sprig and a length of thin wire. It was not a trail. The wind had scattered the pieces, and any assumption about their order would have been unreliable. Still, every object belonged to the same world as the wreath on Wade's table. The puppy stirred in the insulated bag whenever the cab door opened. It did not bark. It pressed its nose to the mesh and followed Wade's movements until he returned. At the mill turnoff, the road narrowed. The river lay somewhere to their right, invisible beneath the darkness and blowing snow. Cottonwoods bent along the bank. Ice coated the lower branches, catching the plow's amber light like dull glass. Amos reduced speed. This next bend drops toward the old bridge, he said. Wade knew the place. Built decades earlier for logging trucks, the bridge had been repaired repeatedly, but never fully replaced. The north approach was under maintenance, which was why Loretta's route slip directed her toward River Road rather than the main crossing. The headlights found tire marks. They cut across the road at a shallow angle, disappeared beneath fresh snow, then returned nearer the shoulder. Amos stopped the plow. Neither man spoke. The tracks continued toward the bridge. At first, Wade saw only the gap in the wooden railing. Then the amber beacon turned. For 1 second, light swept across the delivery van. It rested at a severe angle between the broken rail and an outer support beam. The rear wheels remained on the bridge deck. The front of the van hung lower, nose pointed toward the frozen edge of the river. One rear door stood partly open. Flowers and paper lay scattered across the planks. Amos reached for the radio. Sheriff, we found the vehicle. Naomi answered immediately. Condition? Unstable. Front end over the east side. Rear wheels still on deck. Any sign of the driver? Wade took the flashlight and stepped only as far as the marked approach. He raised the beam toward the windshield. The glass was fogged from within. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then a hand lifted weakly against the driver's window. It slid down and disappeared. "She's alive," Wade said. His body moved before his mind completed the decision. One step. Amos caught the back of his parka. "Not yet." Wade turned sharply. Through the windshield of the plow, the puppy had risen inside the bag, its small face pressed against the mesh, watching him. The radio snapped with Naomi's voice. "No one goes onto that bridge until the anchor points and deck are assessed. Ortiz is 4 minutes out." "Naomi, that vehicle has been there for hours. 4 controlled minutes are better than 4 people in the river." Wade stared towards the van. Somewhere inside it, Loretta was cold, injured, and alone. Every old instinct told him that waiting was a form of failure. But Amos's hand remained firm on his coat, not restraining him so much as reminding him that another person was now holding part of the responsibility. Wade stepped back. The movement cost him more than moving forward would have. Amos released his coat and began unloading the winch gear. Wade took the thermal blankets, checked the safety lines, and watched the southern road for Lena Ortiz's headlights. On the bridge, Loretta's hand appeared once more against the glass. This time Wade did not run toward it. He stood in the snow and prepared to reach her in a way that would not require someone else to rescue him too. Deputy Lena Ortiz arrived from the South Road carrying more equipment than seemed possible for one person. Her patrol SUV could go no farther than the service junction, where the drifts rose above the bumper. She covered the remaining distance on foot, leaning into the wind with a red medical pack strapped high across her back and 2 coils of rope looped over one shoulder. She was 38, compact and quick in her movements, with dark hair braided low beneath a Navy rescue hood. A small orange whistle hung against the reflective strip of her winter jacket. She did not waste breath announcing herself. She looked at the bridge, then at the van. "Who has eyes on the driver?" "I do," Wade said. "Last movement?" "Less than a minute ago." "Any response to sound?" "Unknown." Lena nodded once and crouched near the start of the bridge. She tested the planks with a collapsible pole, checked the visible fasteners, and studied the way the snow had settled around the broken railing. The bridge was not collapsing as a whole. The danger was more specific and therefore less forgiving. The outer beam beneath the van had split, and the vehicle's weight was pulling against the damaged rail. Amos stood beside the rear of the snowplow, unrolling the winch cable. "What do you need?" Wade asked. Lena pointed toward the nearest intact support. "Nothing on that side. The deck has shifted." Amos looked where she indicated. "Then I anchor from the road." "Primary line to the van's rear frame," Lena said. "Secondary strap around that pine. Not the closest one, the larger trunk behind it." Amos followed her gaze and grunted. "That's another 30 feet. "It's also alive." He gave her a brief smile. "I like you already." The 3 of them worked without competing. Amos positioned the plow at an angle that would keep the winch pull aligned with the road rather than dragging the van sideways. He walked the cable out by hand, boots sinking into the packed snow, then lowered himself near the bridge approach to examine the best connection point. Wade carried the secondary strap to the pine Lena had chosen. He wrapped it low around the trunk and protected the bark with a folded length of heavy canvas from the plow's storage compartment. Lena built the safety system. One line would secure Wade. A second would give her control over his return if the bridge shifted. She drove a steel anchor into the frozen shoulder, backed it with a vehicle attachment point, and checked every connection twice. No one said the system could not fail. Amos simply looked at the van and said, "It should slow the wrong thing down." That was the closest any of them came to certainty. Inside the snowplow, the puppy moved beneath the blanket. Wade could see the small, dark muzzle through the mesh of the insulated bag. When he walked past the cab, the puppy raised its head and pressed forward. He stopped beside the door. "You stay," he said. The puppy's left paw appeared against the mesh. Wade rested 2 gloved fingers against it from the other side. Then he stepped away. Lena held up the rescue harness. "Arms through." Wade obeyed. She tightened the straps across his chest and hips, then clipped the main line to the rear attachment point. "If I say stop, you stop." "I understand." "If I say back, you come back." "What if she's close?" Lena's expression did not change. "Then you come back with better information, and we build a safer way to reach her." The answer struck the old part of Wade that still measured courage by distance gained. He looked toward the van. Loretta's hand no longer showed against the glass. "Understood," he said. Lena checked the connection one final time. "Go." Wade lowered himself onto the bridge. He moved on hands and knees, spreading his weight as Lena directed. The wood beneath his gloves was slick with ice. Snow had collected between the planks, hiding cracks and metal edges. The first groan came from somewhere below him. He froze. "Hold," Lena said. Amos leaned over the winch controls, watching the cable. For several seconds, nothing moved. "Continue," Lena said. Wade advanced. The van grew larger with every careful shift. Its rear doors were misaligned, one open a few inches and the other wedged against the frame. Through the gap, he could see crushed stems, overturned flower buckets, and white wrapping paper pressed against the floor. The air smelled sharply of pine and antifreeze. He reached the rear bumper. "Contact," he said into the radio clipped near his collar. "Status?" Naomi's voice answered. "Rear access partly blocked. Vehicle stable for now." "Driver?" "Checking." Wade moved along the safer side of the van, keeping his body low. The driver's window was fogged from inside. He wiped a patch clear with his glove. Loretta Vale sat twisted against the seatbelt. Her silver bob had come loose across one side of her face. The plum-colored winter coat she wore was dusted with broken glass from somewhere inside the cabin, though Wade saw no blood. Her right shoulder was pinned awkwardly between the seat and the door. Her eyes were open. They did not focus on him at first. Wade tapped the glass. "Loretta." Her gaze shifted. "Wade?" The relief in her voice was small and tired. "Yes." "You always arrive after the flowers are ruined?" He exhaled through his nose. "That seems unfair." "It was meant to." The exchange gave him what he needed. She was cold, disoriented, but still herself. "Can you move your legs?" "A little." "Any sharp pain in your neck or back?" "My shoulder." "Can you reach the belt release?" "No." Wade looked toward the driver's door. It had been crushed inward against the timber support. He moved to the rear opening. The door resisted when he pulled it. Flower stems had jammed the lower track, and the body of the van had twisted just enough to bind the latch. He changed his grip and pulled again. The door gave less than an inch. "Need the breaker," he said. Lena clipped the window tool and belt cutter to the equipment line, then sent them across. Wade caught the bag and secured it to his harness. He struck the rear window at the lower corner. Nothing happened. The glass was laminated. He tried the opposite corner, bracing his body against the van. A web of cracks spread across the surface but did not open. Inside, Loretta closed her eyes. "Loretta, I hear you. Keep looking at me. I've looked at you before. You're not improving. Good. Insult me again." She opened her eyes. "What do you call that shirt?" Wade glanced at the camouflage sleeves beneath his parka. "Warm." "I call it a cry for help." Behind him, Amos laughed once over the radio. Lena did not. "Movement under front wheel," she said. Wade stopped. A narrow wooden strip beneath the van had shifted. The sound traveled through the bridge as a dry, splintering crack. The winch cable tightened. Amos's voice changed. "No slide. Cable's holding." "How much margin?" Lena asked. "Less than I'd order voluntarily." Wade looked through the glass again. Loretta's breathing had become shallow. He struck the window a second time. The glass bowed inward. A third blow opened a small hole. He cleared the edge with the tool, folded a heavy cloth over the lower frame, and widened the opening enough to reach the inside latch. Cold air rushed into the van. Loretta flinched. "Sorry." "I was already freezing." Wade forced the rear door until it opened far enough for him to enter. The flower buckets had collapsed toward the front. He pushed them aside one at a time, careful not to shift his weight suddenly. When he reached the driver's compartment, Loretta tried to straighten. "Don't move." "I've been following that instruction for hours." Her lips had lost color. Wade opened the thermal blanket and wrapped it around her torso as best he could without moving the injured shoulder. "Tell me your full name." "Loretta Jean Vale." "What do you do?" "Apparently, I make bad decisions for a living." "Your occupation?" "I sell flowers to people who don't know how to apologize." Wade almost smiled. "Do you own a dog?" Loretta blinked slowly. "No." The answer was barely audible. Then, after a pause, she added, "But one decided I needed her this morning." Wade glanced toward the rear of the van. The puppy, the box, the flower shop. He stored the questions for later. "Where is she?" Loretta asked. "Warm." "That isn't a location." "In Amos's plow." "Poor creature." "Which one?" Loretta's mouth moved faintly. The humor cost her energy, but it also kept her present. Outside, Amos opened the plow door to reach a second strap. For a few seconds, the radio carried the puppies whining into the van. Loretta's eyes opened wider. "That's her." "Yes." "She made it back?" "She's safe." Loretta released a breath she seemed to have been holding since the bridge. Wade realized then that the dog wasn't simply a detail from the accident. Loretta had been waiting to learn whether one vulnerable life had escaped the consequences of her own misfortune. That knowledge steadied her more than his instructions had. He examined the seatbelt. The buckle was trapped beneath Loretta's hip, and the angle of the van made her weight pull harder against the webbing. "I'm going to cut the belt," he said. "Will that make us fall?" "No." It was not a promise. It was an answer to the fear she could manage. Wade clipped a short restraint around Loretta's upper body and connected it to his harness. Lena took the tension from outside. "Ready on patient line," Lena said. Wade cut the seatbelt. Loretta dropped several inches against him. The van creaked. "Hold," Lena ordered. Everyone stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was wind passing through the broken rear window. Then Amos spoke. Still secure. Wade began moving Loretta backward. He did not drag her in one desperate pull. He shifted her a few inches at a time, protecting the right shoulder and keeping the blanket wrapped around her. Lena controlled the line from the bridge approach, taking enough weight to help without twisting Loretta's body. At the rear opening, Wade eased her through first. Lena had moved on to the nearest safe section of the bridge. She received Loretta under the arms and guided her onto a rescue sled. The instant Loretta's full weight left the van, the outer beam gave a loud crack. The front of the vehicle dropped lower. The winch cable snapped tight with a metallic thud. "Back now," Amos said. Wade moved. Lena pulled the safety line while he crawled away from the van. Behind him, one front wheel slipped beneath the broken edge of the bridge, lowering the nose toward the frozen river. The vehicle did not fall. The tangle of beam, cable, and rear axle held it in a precarious angle. but no one looked back long enough to admire the result. They pulled Loretta to the road. An ambulance reached the site 6 minutes later. The medics covered her with warming blankets, stabilized her shoulder, and checked her breathing. Loretta opened her eyes when the puppy began whining inside the plow. Amos carried the insulated bag to the ambulance door, but kept the puppy secured. The small German shepherd pushed its face against the mesh. Loretta lifted 2 fingers from beneath the blanket. "There you are," she whispered. The puppy gave one short bark. Loretta looked at Wade. "She found her way back to the shop?" Wade stared at her. "Not your dog," he thought. "Not abandoned by you. Someone else had lifted that puppy first." "Yes," he said. "She found the shop." Loretta closed her eyes, and the faintest smile crossed her face. As the ambulance doors shut, Wade looked down at the puppy, still watching them through the mesh. He had found her beneath an awning, and assumed she was the one who had been left behind. Now he understood that, before she reached him, the smallest creature in the story had already belonged to one act of kindness. Loretta had saved the puppy first, and the night had nearly taken the chance for anyone to know it. For 2 days, the storm kept Briar Glen folded inward. Snowplows moved through the streets in slow orange arcs. Roofs disappeared beneath white ridges. The flower shop remained dark, its front window holding only the faint reflection of passing headlights. Loretta Vale spent those 2 days at Granite County Hospital. The doctors called her condition fortunate: mild hypothermia, a badly strained right shoulder, bruising across her ribs from the seatbelt. Nothing broken, nothing requiring surgery, nothing that would prevent her from complaining about the food by the second morning. Wade heard this from Sheriff Naomi Voss, who delivered the update with the same measured tone she had used on the bridge. "She'll recover," Naomi said. "That isn't the same as being fine." "No," Naomi replied. "It rarely is." The puppy spent the first night at Blue Mountain Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Martin Hale, a broad-shouldered veterinarian in his early 60s, with thinning white hair and a habit of speaking to animals before people, examined her from nose to tail. He checked her paws, ears, teeth, heartbeat, and reflexes, then passed a scanner over her shoulders and back. No chip, no collar mark, no sign of deliberate injury. Her front pads were mildly abraded, and the skin between 2 toes had been irritated by ice. Otherwise, she was alert, hydrated after treatment, and deeply interested in the drawstring on Wade's sweatshirt. "About 8 weeks," Martin said. "Maybe a little younger, but not by much." The puppy caught the drawstring and pulled. Martin freed it gently. "Healthy appetite, good balance, no obvious illness. She needs warmth, routine, and someone who understands that German Shepherd puppies eventually become German Shepherd adults." Wade looked down at the puppy. She had placed her left paw on the toe of his boot. "I'm not making a decision today." "Good." Martin folded his arms. "People make permanent promises in temporary emotions all the time." The sentence stayed with Wade. He signed the 30-day foster agreement instead of adoption papers. The clinic provided food, a basic vaccination schedule, and a list of precautions. No public dog parks, no unnecessary contact with unknown animals, short periods outside, plenty of rest. Wade carried the puppy back to the cabin in a borrowed crate lined with one of his gray towels. She objected to the crate for exactly 3 minutes. Then she fell asleep with her chin resting on the metal threshold. The cabin changed without asking permission. By the end of the first morning, 3 left-handed gloves had vanished beneath the kitchen table. Wade found them arranged in a loose pile beside a wooden spoon, and one sock he had not realized was missing. The puppy discovered the firewood basket next. She climbed inside, turned twice, and settled proudly between 2 split logs. When one shifted beneath her, She sprang out so fast that she slid across the rug and collided with the leg of a chair. She stared at the basket as though it had violated an agreement. Wade lifted the loose log and secured the stack. "You invaded its territory." The puppy sneezed. He began calling her Little One because every other name felt premature. Little One followed him from room to room, but not always closely. Sometimes she stopped at the doorway and watched until he disappeared, then hurried after him as though several seconds of absence had become intolerable. Wade learned not to turn that behavior into a sentimental story. She was not choosing him forever. She was measuring whether he returned. On the second afternoon, Wade visited Loretta. The hospital room looked too pale for her. White walls, white sheets, white blinds. Even the flowers on the windowsill had been arranged by someone else. Loretta sat upright with her right arm supported in a sling. Her silver hair had been brushed into place, though one side still lifted stubbornly near her cheek. She wore a soft lavender sweater and an expression suggesting she had already dismissed at least one medical recommendation. "You look terrible," she told Wade. "You're wearing a hospital bracelet." "It isn't flattering." He placed a paper bag on the table. Inside were her glasses, a phone charger, 2 clean scarves, and the floral shears with the cracked brass handle wrapped in faded blue tape. Loretta picked up the shears with her left hand. "Now I can threaten the pudding." Wade sat in the chair beside the bed. For a while, they spoke about practical things. The van would remain at the county recovery yard until the insurance adjuster could inspect it. June Talbot, who sometimes helped during holiday seasons, had agreed to water the plants at the shop. Naomi had arranged for the apartment pipes to be checked after the power flickered. Loretta listened, asked specific questions, and corrected Wade twice about which plants should not be moved closer to the radiator. Only after the room settled into silence did she ask, "How is she?" "Trying to collect every left glove I own." Loretta smiled. "That sounds healthy." "Martin says she's about 8 weeks old. No chip." "And no one claimed her?" "Not yet." Loretta looked toward the window. The snow outside had softened in the afternoon light. It clung to the bare maple branches and turned the hospital parking lot into a field of muted shapes. "I found her near the cemetery," she said. Wade did not interrupt. Loretta had gone there early that morning to place winter greenery on her husband's grave. Daniel Vale had been dead 6 years. She still brought flowers at the beginning of every month, not because she believed he needed them, but because arranging something with her hands gave memory a place to sit. Near the tool shed, beneath a corrugated metal awning, she had heard scratching. An old wooden produce crate rested against the wall. One side had warped from moisture. Inside, tucked beneath a torn burlap sack, was the puppy. "There was no note," Loretta said. "No bowl, no blanket except that filthy piece of burlap." "Tracks?" "Some. Maybe from a larger dog. Maybe not. Snow was already covering them." She had looked around the cemetery, called out, and waited. No one came. The groundskeeper had not seen the puppy earlier that morning. Loretta lifted her left hand slightly. "So, I put her in the van." "You were going to the clinic?" "After Pine Lantern." Wade's gaze shifted. "You kept making deliveries." "I had one left. In a storm." "The weather was lighter then." "That doesn't make it wise." Loretta looked directly at him. "No, it makes it understandable." The distinction landed harder than Wade expected. She explained that the wreath for Pine Lantern had not been in the van when she crashed. The cargo space was crowded with earlier orders, so she had left the wreath under the flower shop's rear awning. Her plan had been to finish the nearer deliveries, return for it, and then take the puppy to the veterinary clinic. The bridge accident happened before she made it back. "When the van slid," Loretta said, "I remember the back doors jerking open. I heard the crate move." Her voice changed for the first time. Not weaker, less protected. I couldn't turn around. Wade pictured the van angled over the river, flowers broken across the floor, the puppy somewhere behind Loretta, beyond her reach. She got out, he said. I hoped so. She made it back to town. Loretta's eyes closed briefly. Wade described the route in practical terms. The bridge stood less than a mile from the commercial district. Warehouses, fences, and service buildings lined much of the way. The puppy had not crossed wilderness or navigated some impossible distance. She had likely followed the road in the direction the van had come from, choosing sheltered edges whenever the wind intensified. Loretta listened without needing the story made larger. "And the wreath?" she asked. "It was where you left it." "Of course. She stayed on it." Loretta turned her face toward him. Wade continued. "The wreath smelled like your shop. Pine, preservative, probably your hands. Same smell on her coat." Loretta looked down at her sling. She went back to the strongest part of me she could find. The words were quiet enough that Wade almost missed them. He had spent 2 days imagining the puppy's return as evidence of intention. Some extraordinary attempt to summon help. A small animal making a noble decision in the storm. It embarrassed him now. Not because the truth was less moving, because he had nearly overlooked how moving it already was. "I thought she knew you were in trouble," he admitted. Loretta laughed once, then winced and pressed her left hand to her ribs. "Careful," Wade said. "Don't become interesting while I'm injured." He waited until the pain passed. Loretta settled back against the pillow. "Men who've done heroic work have a bad habit," she said. "What habit?" "You demand loyalty be enormous before you respect it." Wade said nothing. Loretta's gaze remained on the window. She didn't understand the bridge. She didn't know I was waiting. She remembered the person who picked her up from the cold. Her voice softened. That was enough. Wade felt the old shape of responsibility inside him. The belief that love mattered most when it prevented disaster, that loyalty proved itself through sacrifice, that small acts were merely preparation for larger ones. Little One had done none of that. She had followed a scent. She had chosen the only familiar place available. And in doing so, she had returned to the last trace of kindness left in her world. When Wade returned to the cabin, Little One was asleep near the hearth. The wreath still rested beside the door. Most of its flowers had survived, though several petals were bruised from snow and handling. The cream ribbon had dried in uneven folds. The puppy woke when Wade entered. She trotted toward him, stopped halfway, and returned to the wreath. Then she looked back, not commanding, not guiding, simply checking whether both things were still there. Wade sat on the floor between them. Little One crawled onto one boot and began chewing the lace. "You have poor methods," he told her. She pulled harder. Over the next several days, Wade settled into the foster arrangement with the discipline of someone pretending discipline could keep affection neutral. Meals at fixed hours, short walks near the cabin, training sessions lasting no more than a few minutes. A notebook on the counter tracking food, water, sleep, and every suspicious attempt to swallow an object. Little One defeated the system by discovering that Wade stored treats in the left pocket of his canvas coat. From then on, she followed only that side of him. She also stole his carpenter's pencil twice. On the 4th morning, Martin called to remind Wade that 30 days meant 30 days, not 30 days unless the dog becomes inconvenient. Wade assured him he understood. Then he spent 20 minutes building a small barrier around the firewood basket so Little One could no longer climb inside. Later that afternoon, Loretta called from the hospital. Her voice sounded stronger. "I need you to do something. If it involves driving in a blizzard, the answer is no. The storm has passed. That doesn't improve your history." She ignored him. "The wreath." Wade looked toward the door. Little one was asleep beside it, one paw resting on the dried ribbon. "It still has to go to Pine Lantern," Loretta said. "The delivery date passed." "The anniversary hasn't." Wade picked up the rote slip. The actual requested date was the following morning. Loretta had been delivering early because the original forecast warned the storm might close the roads. "It was prepaid," she continued. "The instructions were specific. That wreath is not ordinary." "What's in the card?" "I don't know." "You made it." "I was told not to open the sealed envelope." Wade looked at the wreath again. Until that moment, it had belonged to the puppy's return, Loretta's accident, and the night on the bridge. Now it became something else, an unfinished obligation. "I can bring it," Wade said. "No." He waited. Loretta's voice became firm. "You can deliver it." The distinction reminded him of the hospital conversation. Help did not always mean replacing someone. Sometimes it meant carrying one task exactly as it had been entrusted. "The flowers need work," Wade said. "Bring it to the shop tomorrow morning. June will let you in. I'll tell you what to replace." "You're directing flower repair from a hospital bed?" "I have standards." Wade glanced down as little one woke and placed her left paw across his boot. Loretta continued. "The accident made me late. It does not get to make the promise late, too." The line went quiet. Wade understood then that the wreath was not simply merchandise rescued from under an awning. Someone had paid for it to reach a particular door on a particular day. And whatever waited behind that door had already been waiting long enough. The morning after the storm was almost offensively beautiful. Sunlight lay across Briar Glen in long, clean bands. Snow rested on rooftops, benches, fences, and the low branches of the pines without moving. Every surface seemed newly made, though Wade knew better than to trust a landscape simply because it had learned how to shine. Pine Lantern residence stood on a gentle rise at the eastern edge of town. It was a broad, two-story building of pale stone and cedar, with deep windows and a covered entrance wide enough for wheelchairs, walkers, and delivery carts. The benches along the path had disappeared beneath smooth, white mounds. Above the main doors, a brass lantern caught the sunlight and threw it back in warm flashes. Wade carried the restored wreath in one hand. Little one rode inside the insulated bag secured across his chest. Only her head showed through the open mesh panel. One ear stood upright. The other leaned slightly outward, giving her the permanent expression of someone hearing two different versions of the same story. The wreath had been repaired that morning at Winter Vale Floral. June Talbot had unlocked the shop and followed Loretta's instructions over the phone with the patience of someone accustomed to receiving orders disguised as suggestions. She had replaced several bruised white flowers, tightened the cream ribbon, and left the sealed envelope exactly where Loretta had placed it. Wade had not opened it. The envelope bore only one name: Evelyn Mercer. The woman waiting inside the entrance noticed the puppy before she noticed Wade. Dr. Celia Rowan was 56, with a neat black bob threaded lightly with silver and a long charcoal cardigan over a pale blue blouse. A small nurse's watch was pinned upside down near her pocket, the face positioned so she could read it by lifting the fabric. She smiled at the puppy, then at Wade. That must be the famous traveler. She has not earned famous. Most famous people haven't. Celia's warmth did not make her careless. Before allowing them farther inside, she checked the veterinary note Wade had brought, asked about vaccinations, appetite, stool, energy, and exposure to other animals. "She stays in the carrier," Celia said. No common room, no floor, no contact with residents unless they agree and we remain in a private space. Wade nodded. I was told you'd be strict. By whom? Loretta. That is generous coming from a woman who once tried to deliver 6 centerpieces during an ice warning. She mentioned professional standards. She would. Celia looked at the wreath. Mrs. Mercer was told a delivery had arrived. She did not take that news well. What did you tell her? The truth, that I did not know who sent it. And now? Now she intends to return it without looking at it. Celia led him through a quiet corridor. The building did not feel like a hospital. Framed photographs of Montana landscapes hung along the walls. A piano stood near a sunlit sitting area, its top crowded with sheet music and a bowl of wrapped candies. Somewhere deeper in this building, someone laughed too loudly at a television program. Evelyn Mercer waited near the end of the hall. She stood beside a tall window rather than sitting in the chair provided. At 79, she was slender and straight-backed, dressed in a midnight blue cardigan over an ivory blouse, charcoal trousers, and black loafers polished enough to reflect the light. Her silver hair was cut close at the nape and shaped in soft waves around a long, composed face. A pair of gold-rimmed glasses rested low on her nose. She looked first at Celia, then at Wade, then at the name printed on the flower shop card. Her expression closed. I didn't order that. No, ma'am, Wade said. Then you may take it back. Celia did not intervene immediately. Wade had expected tears, confusion, perhaps gratitude. The absence of all three caught him unprepared. The order was prepaid, he said. That does not make it mine. It has your name. Many things have my name. Medical bills, Christmas cards from organizations I do not support. That proves very little. Little one shifted inside the bag. Evelyn's eyes dropped briefly, but she did not soften. My husband is dead, she'd said. Nearly 2 years. If someone believes sending flowers will improve that fact, I would prefer not to participate. Wade glanced at Celia. She gave no signal to persuade, so he did not. Instead, he said, There is a sealed envelope. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. From whom? I don't know. Then why are you here? Because Loretta Vale was supposed to deliver it yesterday. The name changed something. Not much. A small tension around the mouth. I heard about the accident, Evelyn said. She's recovering. And she sent you. She insisted. That sounds like Loretta. For the first time, Evelyn looked at the wreath rather than through it. The white flowers had been arranged among evergreen branches, not as a funeral piece, but as something quieter. A winter circle. No black ribbon, no sympathy card, no message visible beyond her name. Celia opened the door to a private visiting room. If we are going to discuss this, she said, we can do so without the hallway listening. Evelyn entered reluctantly. The room contained 4 chairs, a low table, and a narrow window overlooking the snow-covered garden. Wade placed the wreath on the table, but kept little one secured against his chest. Celia called Margaret Sloane. Maggie arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a leather document case the color of dark red wine. She was 64, short and round-faced, with pale blue eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and silver blonde hair cut close around her ears. She removed her coat, set the case on the table, and looked at Evelyn without false cheer. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. You've had nearly 2 years to choose better circumstances. Maggie accepted that without flinching. She opened the case and removed a thin folder. Harold left instructions with my office. Evelyn remained standing. What instructions? A single floral delivery on your 50th wedding anniversary. The room became very still. Wade had not known the date carried that weight. Evelyn's face did not break, but one hand closed around the back of a chair. Maggie continued carefully. He established a small trust to cover the flowers, delivery, and administrative costs. The request was sent to Loretta last week. The envelope remained sealed in my office until then. You read it? No. You confirmed his signature? Yes. Was he competent when he wrote it? Yes. The answers came without decoration. Evelyn looked toward the window. Did he know he would be dead? He knew it was possible. That is not what I asked. Maggie lowered her glasses slightly. He knew his condition was worsening. He did not know whether he would live to see the anniversary. Evelyn finally sat. Not because the information comforted her, because it had weight. Celia moved a chair closer but did not touch her. Maggie placed a copy of the trust instructions on the table. There was no requirement that you open the envelope. Evelyn laughed once, without humor. He arranged all this and still found a way to appear considerate. Wade looked down at Little One. The puppy had gone quiet. Evelyn touched the edge of the sealed envelope with one finger. The dead should not be arranging the lives of the living. Maggie folded her hands. No. The lack of argument drew Evelyn's attention. You agree? I think the dead may leave words. They cannot decide what those words become. The sentence remained between them. Wade understood then that this was not a delivery problem. No one in the room could tell Evelyn that the wreath was beautiful, that Harold had meant well, or that grief should be grateful when offered tenderness. The envelope might contain love. It might also contain a burden. Both could be true. Evelyn lifted it from the wreath, but did not open it. I'll keep the letter, she said. Celia nodded. The wreath? No. Wade began to reach for it. Little One chose that moment to push her nose farther through the mesh. She sniffed once, then again, directing all her attention toward Evelyn's cardigan. Evelyn looked down. What is she doing? Investigating. Me? Your pocket, I think. Evelyn's right hand moved instinctively to the cardigan. A faint crinkle came from inside. She drew out a small paper packet of butter cookies. Little One stretched forward. Wade tightened the safety strap before the puppy could climb halfway out of the bag. No. The puppy continued staring at the packet with such solemn concentration that even Maggie's mouth shifted. Evelyn examined the ingredient label. Can she have one? Not a whole one. A piece? A very small piece. Evelyn broke off a crumb and held it near the mesh. Little One took it with surprising delicacy. She chewed, sneezed, then looked at Evelyn as though they had entered a contract. Evelyn did not smile. She did, however, break off a second crumb. No, Wade said. That was for the sneeze. She'll weaponize that? She appears resourceful. Little One placed one paw against the mesh and leaned toward Evelyn's hand. The gesture changed nothing and shifted everything. Not enough to dissolve grief. Not enough to redeem the letter. Only enough to introduce another living need into a room occupied almost entirely by the dead. Evelyn put the cookie packet away. What is her name? She doesn't have one. Maggie glanced at Wade. You've been carrying her around without a name? 30-day foster. That was not the question. Wade ignored her. I call her Little One. That is not a name, Evelyn said. That is an avoidance. Celia turned slightly, hiding a smile. Wade looked at Evelyn. I'm not certain I'm keeping her. Then you are right not to rush. Evelyn held the envelope against her lap. A name is a promise. There was no accusation in it. That made the words more difficult to dismiss. Wade looked at the puppy's folded ear, the amber eyes, and the pale drop of fur beneath her throat. For days, he had measured food, sleep, water, and distance. He had treated attachment as one more risk to manage. Evelyn, who had refused a gift from a dead husband because she feared what it might ask of her, understood the danger of naming better than he did. Wade stood. "We should go." Evelyn looked at the wreath again. "Leave it." He paused. "I thought you didn't want it." "I don't." Her voice remained controlled. "But Loretta nearly died bringing it. Throwing it back into your hands would be poor manners. It was not acceptance. It was only a postponement." Wade left the wreath on the table. Evelyn took the sealed envelope to her room and did not attend dinner that evening. 3 days passed before she called Maggie. She asked the same questions again. The date of Harold's signature, the witnesses, his medical capacity, whether anyone had altered the envelope after his death. Maggie answered each one. A week later, Evelyn called Loretta at home. Loretta's shoulder was still in a sling. She was recovering in the apartment above the flower shop under June's supervision, a condition Loretta described as being held hostage by soup. "Why did you drive in that weather?" Evelyn asked. "Because the forecast said the worst would arrive later." "That was foolish." "Yes." "You could have waited." "Yes." "Then why didn't you?" Loretta was quiet before answering. "Because some deliveries are ordinary until they become late." Evelyn did not thank her, but she kept the wreath. 2 weeks after Wade's first visit, Celia called the cabin. "Mrs. Mercer has agreed to 10 minutes. "With the puppy?" "Especially the puppy. You are apparently incidental." By then, little one had received another vaccination and was cleared for a private visit under the same restrictions. Evelyn waited in the same room. The wreath had been moved from the table to the windowsill. Several flowers had begun to dry, but the cream ribbon remained smooth. The envelope lay open beside Evelyn. Wade did not ask what it said. She told him anyway. "Harold wrote that he could not know what I would feel when I read it." Her voice was steady, but each word seemed chosen from a place deeper than speech. "He wrote that loving him did not require me to close the door on the rest of my life, that he had already been given a life loved by me." She stopped. Little one shifted in Wade's lap. "And?" he asked. Evelyn looked almost offended. "And the rest still belongs to me?" She folded the letter. "I was furious." Wade nodded. He knew exactly where to put the knife. "Kindly," Evelyn said, "which is worse." She did not say the letter healed her. It had not. It had disturbed the arrangement she had made with sorrow. For nearly 2 years, she had treated loneliness as proof of loyalty. Harold's words had not removed the loneliness. They had only made it impossible to call the locked door his wish. Little one reached toward her. This time Evelyn offered no cookie. She simply rested 2 fingers against the puppy's paw through the mesh. During the 3rd visit, snow had begun to melt from the garden path. Evelyn watched little one sleep against Wade's coat. "Perhaps she needs a name that means there is still a tomorrow," she said. Wade looked down. The puppy's breathing was slow and even. Her right ear leaned outward, stubbornly refusing symmetry. "Morrow," he said. Evelyn considered it. Then she nodded. The puppy opened one eye at the sound. Wade said it again. "Morrow." Her tail struck the inside of the carrier once. It was not proof she understood. It was not a sacred sign. It was only the first time a name entered the room and did not feel like a command from the past. This one belonged to something still becoming. And so it stayed. Wade did not adopt Morrow the day he named her. Naming was one promise. Keeping her well for the next 12 or 13 years was another. For the remainder of the 30-day foster period, he treated the question with the same seriousness he once gave to equipment checks and route planning. He measured the cabin doors, inspected the yard fence, calculated food costs, compared veterinary plans, and wrote a list of every day in the coming 3 months when work might keep him away longer than 4 hours. The list was not encouraging. Morrow watched him make it from beneath the kitchen table, chewing the eraser from his carpenter's pencil. "You are not helping your case," Wade told her. She lowered her head and chewed faster. The first improvement was the fence. Wade replaced 2 weak sections behind the cabin, sank new posts into frozen ground, and added a gate that closed without leaving a gap beneath it. Morrow supervised from a secure pen near the porch. Each time Wade carried a board across the yard, she followed him from one side of the pen to the other, as though his work required constant inspection. Amos arrived on the second morning with a post driver, 2 thermoses, and no memory of which one contained coffee. "You know," Amos said, studying the new fence line, "most people decide they're keeping a dog before building a small correctional facility." "I haven't decided." Amos looked at Morrow. Morrow sat with one paw resting on Wade's boot. "Of course not." Wade ignored him. He registered for a puppy training class held twice a week in the back room of the county feed store. The instructor taught reward-based handling, recall foundations, calm greetings, and the less glamorous subjects of biting sleeves, stealing socks, and preventing a young dog from eating objects with no nutritional value. Morrow learned sit within 2 sessions. She also learned that sitting could produce food, so she began sitting whenever she wanted something. At the back door, beside the refrigerator, in front of the wood stove, and once in the middle of the hallway while Wade was carrying a box. "Move." Morrow sat more firmly. The trainer watched from across the room. "She thinks she completed the assignment." "The assignment was not to block the hall." "You should have been more specific." Outside, Morrow could walk beside Wade for half a block with admirable focus. Then snow slid from a roof, a leaf crossed the road, or the bakery door opened, and every lesson dissolved. Wade wanted progress to form a straight line. Morrow preferred spirals. The harder problem appeared whenever he wore the forest green parka from the night of Loretta's rescue. At the sight of it, Morrow stopped playing. She followed Wade to the door, pressed against his leg, and pawed at his boot. If he stepped outside without her, she whined and scratched lightly at the threshold. Dr. Martin Hale explained that the parka likely carried a strong association with departure, cold, and uncertainty. "She doesn't need you to stay every time she worries," Martin said. "She needs proof that leaving is not the same as disappearing." Wade began with 30 seconds. He put on the parka, stepped outside, waited, then returned without ceremony. Morrow greeted him as though he had crossed an ocean. The next attempt lasted 1 minute, then 3. At 5 minutes, she stopped scratching and lay near the door. Wade watched through the kitchen window, though Martin had specifically warned him not to turn the exercise into a surveillance operation. The difficulty was not Morrow's alone. Every time Wade left, part of him wanted to re-enter before she could become distressed. He told himself this was good care. In truth, it was also control. If he returned at the first sign of discomfort, neither of them had to discover whether the bond could survive uncertainty. Amos became the first person other than Wade to hold Morrow's leash. The transfer happened in the feed store parking lot. Wade gave 3 instructions about the harness, 2 about the treats, and 1 about avoiding the bakery entrance. Amos listened, then held out his hand. "Anything else?" "Yes." "What?" Wade could not think of a 7th instruction that did not sound ridiculous. He gave Amos the leash. Morrow looked back once. Then she followed Amos toward the snowbank with complete confidence, because he had a strip of dried chicken in his pocket. Wade stood where she had left him. The leash in Amos's hand looked ordinary. That was what unsettled him. Nothing had broken when responsibility changed hands. Across town, Loretta was learning a similar lesson with far less patience. Physical therapy began 3 mornings a week. Her shoulder improved slowly, though lifting her right arm above chest height remained painful. What troubled her more was driving. On dry pavement, she could sit behind the wheel without difficulty. When sunlight caught a strip of ice, her hands tightened around the steering wheel, and the damaged bridge returned in fragments. The sound of wood, the tilt of the van, flowers sliding toward the windshield. Everyone had advice. A supplier suggested she retire. A customer asked whether she planned to sell the shop. One well-meaning neighbor offered to speak with a real estate agent. Loretta thanked him, then removed his name from the Christmas discount list. Wade did not offer to save the business. Instead, he asked for work. "Hourly," he said. "Winter deliveries only. You choose the route." Loretta studied him from behind the flower counter. Her right arm remained in a light support sling. Her silver bob curled against one cheek, and her old brass shears lay beside a row of tulip stems. "You expect to be paid?" "Yes." "Good. Charity makes people careless." She hired him for 12 hours a week. The arrangement preserved what mattered to her. Loretta managed orders, selected flowers, approved routes, and decided which deliveries could wait. Wade drove. He did not reorganize her shelves, change her invoices, or suggest that the shop would run more efficiently if she surrendered parts of it. June Talbot began the same week. At 48, June had a full, freckled face, auburn hair usually gathered in a low knot, and a black marker tucked behind one ear. She had spent several years caring for her mother and needed work that allowed her to leave in the afternoons. She wore a mustard-colored apron with deep pockets and learned quickly which flowers Loretta considered elegant and which she described as expensive weeds with public relations. June did not take over the shop. She made it possible for Loretta to remain inside it. That distinction mattered. Morrow's visits to Pine Lantern began only after Martin approved her health and vaccination progress. Celia Rowan established the rules in writing. Short leash. Private room first. No feeding without Wade's approval. No contact with residents who had allergies, fragile skin, balance risks, or simply did not want a dog near them. "She is not a therapy dog," Celia reminded everyone. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. No one asked her to practice medicine. The first visits lasted 10 minutes, then 15. For several weeks, Evelyn remained in the private room. Morrow sat near Wade's chair, investigated the carpet, and occasionally stared at Evelyn's pocket with the concentration of an auditor. One afternoon, Evelyn stood to refill her water. Morrow rose too. "It is 6 steps," Evelyn told her. Morrow followed all 6. The next week, Evelyn agreed to walk as far as the small sitting area beyond the corridor. The week after that, she continued to the common room because Morrow had discovered a green rubber ball beneath a chair and refused to leave without it. The changes were not dramatic enough to announce. Evelyn did not wake one morning restored to the woman she had been before Harold's death. She still spent long hours alone. She still wore her wedding ring. Some days she read his letter and became angry all over again. But Morrow introduced errands too small to fear. A bowl of water needed carrying. A leash needed untangling. Someone had to tell Wade that 4 treats were not a few. In the common room, Morrow began collecting people. Mr. Halverson, a retired mechanic who rarely spoke, allowed her to sleep across his boots while he read the newspaper. Mrs. Bellamy, who sat alone beside the window, learned to roll the green ball with one foot. Arthur Pike insisted for 3 visits that he did not like dogs, then began bringing a coat with unusually full pockets. Morrow inspected him every time. "Search without probable cause," Arthur complained. Evelyn replied, "Stop carrying evidence." The laughter that followed was not healing. It was simply life returning in small, uneven portions. At Wintervale Floral, Loretta and June faced a different problem. Several bouquets remained at the end of each week. The flowers were still fresh, but a bent stem, uneven bloom, or aging edge made them unsuitable for full-price sale. Loretta usually composted what could not be reused. Evelyn noticed the leftover flowers during one of Wade's deliveries. "Where did these go?" she asked. "Somewhere dignified," Loretta said. "The trash?" The dignified part is theoretical. Evelyn looked at a small bunch of white chrysanthemums and evergreen clippings. "There are people in this town who have not received flowers in years." Wade expected Loretta to object to the cost. Instead, she said, "Flowers are not useful." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You have built a career around that claim? They don't feed anyone. They don't repair roofs." "No," Evelyn said. "They tell someone they crossed another person's mind." The room quieted. The idea did not become a program that afternoon. It became a question. Who would receive the flowers? Who would ask permission? Who would deliver them? Who would pay for fuel? Celia refused to provide resident information without written consent. Maggie insisted on privacy rules. Loretta would not allow unpaid labor to quietly become an obligation. Wade would not agree to knock on unknown doors without clear arrangements. They met twice in the Pine Lantern Library. Maggie drafted a simple consent form. Celia identified residents who wished to participate. A local veterans association offered a limited fuel stipend for deliveries to older veterans and their surviving spouses. Loretta provided flowers that could no longer be sold but remained fresh. Wade accepted payment for distant routes. Amos agreed to advise on road conditions during storms, while making it clear the county snowplow would not become a floral delivery vehicle. June wrote names on small cards and kept the list locked in Loretta's office. Evelyn named the project. "Open door rounds," she said. Amos considered it. "What if they don't open the door?" "Then we respect the answer." That became the rule beneath all the others. The first delivery was not scheduled until the following week. For now, 6 small arrangements stood along the flower shop counter. None were perfectly matched. One leaned slightly left. Another contained more evergreen than flowers. Morrow sat beneath the counter in an olive bandana, watching a fallen leaf turn in the warm air from the vent. Wade looked around the shop. Loretta was correcting an invoice with her left hand. June was wrapping a vase. Evelyn sat at a side table writing the first card. Amos was testing every thermos to locate his coffee. No one in the room had become less capable by accepting help. No one had been replaced. The work had simply grown wide enough to require more than one pair of hands. Evelyn read the card aloud before placing it in the envelope. "No obligation to answer. We only wanted you to know someone thought of you today." Loretta considered the wording. Then she nodded. Outside, snow slipped from the shop awning and fell harmlessly onto the cleared sidewalk. Morrow lifted her head at the sound, but did not run toward Wade. She looked at him, saw that he was still there, and settled again. By the first week of March, winter had begun loosening its grip on Briar Glen without admitting defeat. Snow still covered the northern sides of roofs and gathered in blue-white ridges along the roads, but the afternoons lasted longer. Water dripped steadily from the awning of Wintervale Floral. The sound struck the metal gutter in a patient rhythm, as though the building itself were counting toward spring. Inside the shop, Morrow lay beneath the counter with one paw across Wade's boot. She had grown noticeably in a month. Her legs looked longer, her paws somehow larger, and the ear that had once folded completely now stood most of the way up before leaning outward at the tip. The cream drop on her chest remained unchanged. Wade sat at Loretta's work table with adoption papers spread before him. Dr. Martin Hale had approved the placement after inspecting the cabin fence, reviewing Wade's work schedule, and confirming that Amos had agreed to serve as a backup caregiver. Wade had completed the foster period, attended training classes, and proved he could provide the exercise, veterinary care, and consistency a German shepherd would require. The decision no longer felt like something that had happened to him. He had chosen it. Morrow had chosen to chew his shoelace while he did. Amos leaned against the counter, drinking from the only one of his 3 thermoses that actually contained coffee. "She's reviewing the contract," he said. Wade pulled his boot back. Morrow followed the lace. "She objects to the footwear clause." "Smart dog. Those boots look legally questionable." Loretta, still moving carefully with her recovering shoulder, stood behind the counter arranging pale yellow tulips in a narrow vase. She had abandoned the sling, but continued physical therapy twice a week. Some mornings she could reach the highest shelf. Other mornings June moved the boxes without comment. Loretta watched Wade sign the final page. "Do you understand that she will eventually weigh more than some furniture?" "Yes." "She will shed enough hair to build another dog." "I've been warned." "She has already learned how to open the lower cabinet." Wade looked down. Morrow stopped chewing and stared toward the lower cabinet with suspicious innocence. Loretta nodded toward the papers. "Then sign before she finds a lawyer." Wade did. No one applauded. June Talbot stamped the date onto the file, Amos finished his coffee, and Loretta returned to the tulips. The ordinariness of the moment made it feel more permanent than ceremony would have. Morrow was no longer a temporary problem near the stove. She was his dog. The first open-door rounds deliveries began 2 days later. The program operated on a modest schedule. 3 routes a week, no more than 4 stops per route. Loretta designed small arrangements from flowers still fresh enough to enjoy, but no longer suitable for full-price sale. June trimmed stems, wrapped vases, and checked each address against the locked consent list. At Pine Lantern, Evelyn and several residents wrote short cards. Maggie Sloan handled the privacy forms and made certain no one received an unrequested visit. The Veterans Association reimbursed part of the fuel costs for rural stops. Wade was paid for delivery time, while Amos checked road reports and called if a route became unsafe. Morrow rode in the back seat of Wade's truck in a secured canine harness, wearing an olive bandana embroidered with a small cream-colored pine branch. She took the position seriously. At the first stop, a retired postal worker named Mr. Keene opened the door, accepted the flowers, said, "Thank you," and closed it again. Wade stood on the porch for half a second longer than necessary. Then he returned to the truck. Morrow watched him through the rear window. "That counted," he told her. The second recipient invited him inside for coffee. Mrs. Ainsley lived alone in a white farmhouse at the edge of town. She placed the flowers beside a photograph of her sister and began telling Wade about a trip they had taken to Yellowstone in 1978. Wade listened. 10 minutes became 40. When he finally returned to the truck, Morrow had fallen asleep with her chin on the safety strap. The third person did not care for flowers at all. "They die," Mr. Rollins said from behind his screen door. "That is generally how they operate," Wade replied. Mr. Rollins looked at the small arrangement. Then at Wade. Then at the dark hallway behind him. "My light's out." Wade changed the bulb above the entryway while Mr. Rollins held the ladder steady. The flowers remained unopened on the table, but when Wade left, they were still there. Open-door rounds did not produce a revelation at every house. Sometimes no one opened the door. Wade left the arrangement in the designated sheltered location and marked the delivery complete. Sometimes a recipient spoke for an hour. Sometimes a person only wanted to complain about the weather. One woman told Wade about her husband's death and became irritated when he offered no advice. "Aren't you going to tell me it gets easier?" she asked. "I don't know if it does." She considered that. Good. Then she invited him back for tea the following week. Wade gradually understood that presence was not a repair tool. He had spent much of his life entering difficult situations with the expectation that something should be secured, removed, stabilized, or completed. Open-door rounds asked less and demanded more. Knock. Wait. Accept the answer. At the flower shop, Loretta also practiced a new form of restraint. She still did not drive when ice covered the roads. On clear days, she sometimes sat behind the wheel of June's parked car and allowed the engine to run. Her hands remained loose until sunlight reflected from a frozen patch near the curb. Then her shoulders tightened. Once, Wade saw her standing beside the driver's door with the keys in her left hand. He almost offered to drive. Instead, he waited. Loretta looked at the road for a long time, placed the keys in her pocket, and went back inside. "I changed my mind," she said. "All right. You don't have to sound pleased." "I don't." "You do internally." Wade opened the passenger door for Morrow. Loretta pointed at him. "That expression is why people prefer flowers." She did not become the woman she had been before the bridge. She became someone who knew where fear lived and refused to let it make every decision. Evelyn's changes were even quieter. She still kept Harold's photograph beside her bed. She still spoke to it at night, sometimes with affection and sometimes with irritation. She continued wearing her wedding ring and never allowed anyone to describe her life with Harold as something she needed to leave behind. But she began spending afternoons in the Pine Lantern common room. She organized the open-door rounds card schedule, corrected spelling, rejected sentimental phrases, and insisted every note sound like it came from a human being rather than a greeting card machine. "No, thinking of you in this difficult season," she told one volunteer. "Winter is a season. Grief is not weather." Morrow usually slept beneath Evelyn's chair during these sessions. When she did not sleep, she searched pockets. Arthur Pike remained her favorite suspect. He continued insisting he disliked dogs, yet his coat produced biscuits with remarkable consistency. One afternoon, Evelyn caught him breaking a treat into pieces beneath the table. "You are encouraging corruption," she said. Arthur slipped the remaining piece back into his pocket. "I am gathering evidence." Morrow placed both front paws on his shoe. Evelyn looked toward Wade. "Your officer is compromised. She was never sworn in. That explains the standards." By mid-March, the original wreath had begun to fail. The pine branches had dried. White petals loosened whenever someone crossed the room. The cream ribbon remained intact, but the living parts of the arrangement had reached their natural end. Loretta brought the wreath back to her shop. With Evelyn's permission, she removed the dried greenery and saved the wire frame. She pressed several surviving petals between sheets of paper, cleaned the scratched ribbon, and rebuilt the wreath using fresh evergreen, pale hellebores, and small white roses. She did not erase the damage. The ribbon's worn section remained visible near the lower edge. "That part belongs there," Evelyn said. Loretta nodded. "Damage is not always decoration." "No, but sometimes it is evidence." When the new wreath was finished, they carried it to Pine Lantern and hung it in the common room. Evelyn kept Harold's original letter in her private room. Maggie prepared a short excerpt for public display only after Evelyn approved every word. Beneath the wreath, a small brass plate read, "Delivered late, but never forgotten." The residents gathered on the first mild afternoon of spring. Sunlight entered through the western windows. Meltwater ran from the roof outside, and patches of dark earth had begun appearing beneath the trees. Evelyn stood beside the wreath. She wore a deep sapphire dress, a silver-gray cardigan, and the swallow brooch that had belonged to her mother. Harold's ring remained on her hand. She did not give a speech about recovery. She spoke about anger. "When this wreath arrived," she said, "I believed my husband had reached from the grave to tell me how to live." The room remained quiet. "I was furious with him for being right about me. Then I became furious with myself for making that matter." A few people smiled gently. Evelyn looked at Harold's copied words beneath the wreath. "He did not give me permission to keep living. I thought that was what the letter meant." She paused. "The truth is less romantic and more useful." Her gaze moved across the room. "That permission was never his to give. It had never stopped belonging to me." Wade stood near the doorway with Morrow on a short leash. Loretta sat beside June. Celia remained near the back, allowing the gathering to belong to the residents rather than the institution. Maggie watched through her tortoise-shell glasses, one hand resting on her closed document case. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Morrow's nose lifted. She turned sharply toward Amos. Amos froze. Morrow walked straight to him and sat with rigid concentration, staring at the pocket of his denim jacket. Evelyn folded her arms. "What are you carrying?" "Personal property." Morrow touched his boot with one paw. Amos looked around the room. "This search lacks a warrant." Arthur Pike pointed from his chair. "Check the left pocket. That's where amateurs keep evidence." Amos removed a small bag of dog biscuits. The room broke into laughter. Not the careful laughter people use to protect someone's grief. Real laughter. Evelyn laughed too, one hand resting against the edge of the rebuilt wreath. That evening, Wade drove home with Morrow asleep in the back seat. The cabin was warm when they arrived. Snow clung to her paws and melted across the floor in dark, uneven prints. Wade looked at the towel hanging near the door. A month earlier, he would have reached for it immediately. Instead, he sat on the floor and removed Morrow's harness. She circled once, leaned against him, and rested her head on his knee. The room was no longer orderly in the old way. A rubber toy lay beneath the chair. Training notes covered part of the counter. One left glove remained missing. Wade did not feel that he had discovered a new mission. Missions ended. This was something quieter and less obedient. Loretta still feared ice. Evelyn still missed Harold. Wade still woke some mornings expecting silence to be easier than companionship. No one had been restored to an earlier version of themselves. But Wintervale Floral remained open. Pine Lantern carried more voices through its halls. Doors across Briar Glen received flowers with no obligation to answer, and Morrow, who had once pressed her body against a wreath because it held the last familiar scent in the snow, now slept with the certainty that someone would return. The wreath on the common room wall had been made twice. The first time, it carried one man's love to one woman. The second time, it carried many people back toward one another. Love had not asked them to forget what had been lost. It had asked only that memory not become a lock. Sometimes a heart opened through courage, sometimes through anger, and sometimes it opened because a dog with wet paws stood patiently at the door, trusting that someone on the other side was still allowed to choose. Sometimes moving forward does not mean leaving love behind. It means carrying that love gently, without allowing grief to close every door ahead. Wade Evelyn, Loretta, and Morrow were not restored to who they had once been. They simply learned that a wounded heart can still make room for another life, another friendship, and another quiet morning. May God bring peace to the places in your life that still ache, and may He send small reminders that you are not forgotten. Please share your thoughts in the comments. If this story brought you comfort, subscribe and join us for more stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances.